Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, it's good to have you here for Life Support. I'm glad you joined us. What we try to do on this program is we tell stories of redemption. We tell stories about how God intervenes in really difficult situations. And we're talking about Fight to Forgive Ministries. Kevin's here, and he's got an incredible story to tell. And just to give you the quick summation, I guess, and we can pick it up, but he was stabbed 37 times in his home. He was left for dead. He was taken to the hospital, awoke with his family there, but then came the journey of forgiveness, and then came Fight to Forgive Ministries. So, Kevin, you went through one of the most horrific experiences anybody ever could. You know, I mean, there's different levels, but this sounds to me like just a terrifying, awful thing. Did you struggle with fear after this?
Yeah, I would. Fear was obviously the number one of many enemies to follow.
Yeah.
I mean, from the hospital room where I was convinced he was going to come back and finish me off to when we had to decide where is home. We had to go back to the home. Mm-hmm. You know, and it took about a month. But we went there, and this is where I realized how fear is not just an emotion. Fear is a spirit, and really, if you're going to fight the enemy of fear, the spirit of fear, you have to use spiritual weapons. And so for me, the enemy overexposed himself with the fear right away. First night back in my house, you know, I'm just a nervous wreck, scared to death. I have a pastor who's got 2 guns next to him. The guy's still on the run.
Yeah.
We're all in the house. I couldn't sleep. 3 a.m, the exact same time as the attack, all the power in my house goes out.
Oh, man.
I got up. I'm just
like
adrenaline. Movie. I went and yelled at my wife, jump out the window. He's back. He's back.
So you think he cut the power?
I did.
Yeah.
She's sitting here going, and because she just, for a month, been taking care of me, she goes, I'm too tired. I'm not going anywhere. He can kill me. And I'm like, get out of the window. And then the guy, he's loading his weapon. He's racing downstairs with his weapon. And then my wife's sitting there in bed. Why is he running downstairs? Didn't we learn last time that was not a good idea? And I'm like, come on.
Right.
But was just terrified.
Yeah.
And even for, you know, I can't tell you how many times and it just so happened, to sum up that story, about a 1-block radius in our city lost power, and it just so happened to be mine at the exact same time of my attack. And so I kind of quickly realized that fear was going to be something I was going to have to...
Yeah, your body's kind of trained to respond that way.
Yep.
You know?
It's the fight and the flight. It's
right,
your natural.
Flight. Yep.
And so, and that's where, for me, kind of what I had to deal, how I began to deal with fear is... I had to bring another alternative because I can't just run and I can't just fight. And so really when fear came in, that was my sign to worship. And worship became, I couldn't pray for a long time after the attack, couldn't read my Bible much after the attack. But worship was and so whenever fear came in, it was that trigger to remind me I'm in a spiritual battle. I think it's Romans 8 that talks about don't be given over again to a spirit of fear. And how you fought it was remembering that you're a son, you've been adopted, and you cry out, Abba. So I had to keep remembering who I was in Christ. He's my father. I'm his son. I'm loved. And so when fear comes, I can't lose that position of sonship and knowing that I have a father that's watching me. But it's easy to go, but he wasn't there last time.
Yeah, that's right.
But I had to do it, and worship became that way for me to continue to keep in that relationship close to him so that I didn't find myself wandering and getting myself in areas where I think I probably would have done great harm to myself and even my family. And so fear was definitely one of the greatest enemies.
I can imagine. And you can talk yourself into anything if you let yourself, you know. We had to wait 8 months during the investigation. We didn't know how our son was killed. We didn't know. We knew where because we had to go pick up his car. We knew it was violence, but we didn't know how or who or anything. And though the detectives, you know, were assuring us that, you know, of course, we're watching over you, we laid in fear for 8 months. Our kids would sleep in bed with us, and I understand exactly what, you know, you're saying. And you try not to give into it.
Yeah.
But then I started to learn some tools, and I started to put worship music on, and I had a sleep tape I would just stick in my ears and try to doze off, listening to Jesus' name over and over and over again. It took about a year before I didn't need that anymore. So
I had a very similar. And we had the police department, because I would call them so often. Every time I thought I heard something, they would, in the weeks after the fact, they would drive by the house and they would shine their lights and their sirens outside my window so I could see them to let me know that they're driving by.
See, that's so good.
And so there was
that means so much, doesn't it?
It was huge.
It's amazing.
It was huge.
You don't hear those stories.
No. You don't.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. We had the chief drop over quite often.
Yep.
And he would just come with his dog, for the kids, and you don't hear those stories either.
Yep.
All right, so you've turned this, and you're trying to forgive this fellow. You got to the arraignment, you saw him, he had been extradited back. Then where did the relationship go, and this whole idea of forgiveness go from there?
Yeah, it didn't go to had no contact with them until the sentencing. Mm-hmm. In the sentencing, they do the victim's impact statement, and at that time, they'd asked, they kind of put you aside, and they said, we want you to just lay it heavy, say everything, how it impacted you. And at that moment, I said, I'm not giving a victim's impact statement. I said, I'll give a life statement. And and to me, what a life statement was taken from Joseph, the life of Joseph. And it was when he came face to face with his brothers who were responsible for all kinds of difficulties in his life. And when he comes face to face with them, he didn't go back and recount and reopen and rehash and revisit all those places. He simply said, yep, you're my brothers. I'm your brother, Joseph. I'm the one, you did this. But he just reframed his story, mm-hmm. and he began asking about his father. The first question wasn't, why did you do this? He's like, how's Dad?
Yeah,
right. And so
mm-hmm.
and he wanted good to come to them, and he wanted them to know not to be condemned in a sense, and he wanted those things. So I watched their interaction. So for me, I gave a life statement, and really what it was following Joseph's script of putting God in the center of my story instead of beginning already to rewrite a story that's going to be with this person in the center of my story. And so I shared, yes, this is the guy who did it. Yes, he stabbed me 37 times. But one, obviously, today I stand, and I let him know that I had forgiven him.
Good. Yeah.
But I then went on and said, because this was allowed to happen in my life, for whatever reason, I'm a different person today. I'm a better father. I'm a better husband. I don't let a day go by without my wife letting her know how much she's valued and appreciated and loved. Mm-hmm. I'm a better pastor. Mm-hmm. To me, ministry was number one. Hey, if I have a Bible study class I'm supposed to teach and my son has something special going on, guess who's not going to be teaching Bible study that night? Me. Yeah. And I reprioritized my life around, instead of making it about ministry and doing things for God, it just changed so much who I was. I began to be like Joseph. I saw people different for the first time. I look at Joseph's story. He couldn't tell his brothers were hurting, but then yet here he is in prison, and he noticed the cupbearer and the baker. He notices one day that they're just downcast. Yeah. He became a seer, and I think for me, I became a seer. And so I shared how I began to see things differently and how I began to notice things that I would walk by that I would have never noticed before, because I was just too busy with life, too busy with my dreams or my agendas, but I noticed people. And so in that moment, being able to give a life statement was sharing that in front of him. And then after that, about a month after that, I wrote him for the first time in prison just to let him know that I meant what I said. And then that opened the door for a rocky, but it's been now 12 years of correspondence, and it's had its ups and downs, its good moments and not so good moments.
Right.
And but yeah.
We were blessed with victim reconciliation people who were former pastors, but the government didn't know they were former pastors. So they knew what we were trying to accomplish. Yeah. And I gave the gospel to this guy every which way, when we'd write him, and they always passed it along. But now you're working in death rows. So let's go to that for a minute, because that fascinates me, and because we all watch movies. And what is death row like?
Well, it's man. There's so many. There's different sides to death row.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what media and what everyone paints it out to be, especially when it comes to the individuals there. You think the worst of the worst. You think of these people who are just lost, and that is not.
Yeah, like the Green Mile, where he's, they got their hands hanging out of the bars and they're wrecking stuff.
No, there's men there who are sentenced to death but have never killed anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But because they were part of a crime,
right?
They got sentenced to death, and even the person who shot and murdered a person didn't get sentenced to death.
Wow.
So you get to see the judicial things. There's a lot of things you get to see that you're like, how that is. But what really moved us is when we went there, they launched in Texas on death row a faith-based focus, where the warden came in and they said, we believe in not just leaving these guys. Like, they're sentenced to death. They didn't know they were being sentenced to segregation for 20 and 30 years. There's guys on death row since 1976.
Wow. And
they live in segregation 23 hours a day in their cell.
Wow.
And they've done it now for 30-plus years. And so they never knew that that's what the sentence was. They knew it was death. But so when we came in there, we were shocked to go to these parts of death row that were so full of life. And there's a section that's now been renamed Life Row. And these are individuals who have gone on a faith journey, who have come and they've received Christ, or they're growing in their faith. But these guys it is night and day. They worship for hours. They pray with one another. You come in there, it is like you're greeted and welcomed, and there's such hospitality, even though they can't come out of their cells. And it's just it is just to see the move of God that's taking place on death row, on Life Row, has changed our lives. And God's opened the doors for us to have access, that we're able to go cell to cell to minister to these guys, and we have to wear vests, protective vests, and now my son and I do it together, which was the other thing that was eye-opening for us, is they'd never seen a father and son come in and minister together. Their words are, usually the people that come in and minister us are all 180 years old. They're like towards the end of their life, they're retirees. And so they're like saying a father and a son, younger, and that really captivated and got there. So when we come in there, we would do all-day forgiveness seminars with them, talk with them, and then we would do question and answers. They would spend more of the time asking my son questions because they have children or they have family members, and they're wanting to get insight from his perspective. And and then for them to see a modeling of a father and son relationship, with most of these guys don't have that father relationship. They've never seen it.
That's cool.
And so they're seeing a father and son relationship. I just got a message from one of the guys. He wrote it actually to my son because he saw a video of my son talking, and I was watching him, and he goes, what stood out to me most in your video was the way your father was looking at you when you were speaking.
Oh, that's nice.
He goes, I could just see how proud he was, and I could see that. And we're able to minister and to take some of these guys on and almost become like a father figure to them, and let them hear for the first time from a father that we're proud of them. We're proud of them for the steps they're taking. We're proud of them that they've owned up to the responsibilities, that they're growing. And so it's been life-changing for us to see that.
Wow. Okay, somebody's listening right now. What if they were to say to you, hey, it's great that you were able to forgive that guy.
Yeah.
But this person did something to me. And many times it's the personal things that are getting harder sometimes than the big stuff.
Yeah.
My husband did this to me. There's no way I can forgive him. Yeah. What would you say to that person?
First of all, I definitely would sympathize and empathize with them, because I always say this even in that situation, for a husband and wife, especially when there's been a betrayal or something like that. It's much harder for those people to forgive a spouse like that than it is for me to forgive this attacker. Why? Because he was a stranger.
Yeah. This is so personal.
Level of hurt is it's intimacy.
Yeah,
the closer you are, the deeper the wounds.
Yeah.
So I would obviously, I would let them know I understand the battle that they're facing, Because sometimes they go, you could forgive this guy for all that he did to you, but I can't forgive him for just, and I'm like, no, you can't compare those stories. And so, because I want them to know that what they're feeling is natural. But I think for me, it's taken that journey with them a little bit, I think, to also rediscover their own forgiveness story. And I think there was a quote that I heard, I think it was Charles Spurgeon, that says, if you want to learn about being forgiven, go to the cross. If you want to learn about forgiving others, hang out there for a while. And I think sometimes what happens is we fail to forgive others, or we struggle sometimes because we're not living close to the cross. So I usually start with, tell me about your walk with the Lord. Talk with me about your history. Talk to me about how you came to Christ. Talk to me about, because I think sometimes connecting them to their own forgiveness story is a key to understanding, in a sense, without telling them directly, forgiveness needs to be a response.
Yeah.
So,
but they hear, people hear that kind of browbeating, and the fact that you're willing to take time and get to know them and empathize with them is really important, because they're used to getting hit over the head with Bibles and And
especially because it's the cornerstone of our faith.
I know, and it does tell. There is the forgiveness command in there, but it's a journey, like you said before. It takes time. Yeah,
it's a fight, and like I said, so we really have reframed it. My take on forgiveness, it's kind of developed over time a little bit, but I feel like if we're to forgive just as God through Christ has forgiven us, and people go, yeah, but we're not God. Well, then that's Ephesians 4:32. But then why does Ephesians 5:1 say imitate it?
Yeah.
So he wouldn't tell us to imitate it, to forgive just as God through Christ has forgiven us, if it's not possible. So for me, how I look at God's forgiveness towards us is God's forgiveness towards us, it's transactional in nature.
Yeah.
It's not a process. God doesn't sit here and it's not a feeling. It's not this journey. It's not a 12-step. It's transactional in nature, but it involves that substitute. It involves
legal justification.
Yeah. And so for me, what I've really discovered is that initial act of forgiveness is the key. It's getting to the place of where you can now, again, involve God in your story, what Jesus has done for you, allow the same blood that covered your sins to cover the wrongs and wounds that someone committed against you. That's the starting point. But then the fight to keep forgiving, that's the faith walk.
Yeah.
That's where there's an equipping, and I think that's where the church, we tell people to forgive. Like I always do the illustration. It's not I forgive this guy, they stabbed me 37 times. I got to forgive, we lost everything. We went bankrupt. 5 years of sleepless nights. My kids lost their innocence at 9 and 12. I mean, I have a record of wrongs it's pretty in-depth. And I had to forgive not only just what he did, but all of the impact that was created also. Yeah. And so I had to cover all of that with the same blood that forgives me for all of that I've done. I had to do that. But so that's the part for me where I've learned is I have to put Jesus in the center of the story. My response to him is to cover their wrongs with the same blood that forgives and washes me. But then that fight to forgive is now, there's an equipping. And I feel like the church and me as a pastor, I felt so convicted of how I've probably hurt people with my message of oversimplifying forgiveness.
I know I have. Before this stuff happened to me, I just go back and think what a dope I was.
Yeah.
You
need to forgive them. You need to forgive them.
I know. All right, tell me about Fight to Forgive. How do I get a hold of that ministry?
We have a website. It's called fighttoforgive.com. And it shares a little bit about kind of our ministries that we do, whether it's speaking at churches or workshops or seminars. It tells us about the prison ministry to death row and kind of our heart with there and our journey.
Yeah. And what's the website?
Fighttoforgive.com.
Okay. It's pretty cool talking to you. And you're a good guy. You got a lot of really good stuff going for you. I'm glad you're doing this. I think you're going to help a lot of people. You already have. Yeah. And you've only been at it, 15 years?
Yeah, it is. I've never seen, the last thought with this, I've never thought of how much good that can come from just forgiveness. We saw both of the police officers that saved my life, both came to Christ. Oh, man. We saw medical rescue, the paramedics come to Christ. We've seen the doors that God has opened, and I sit here going, all that I did was modeled Christ's forgiveness to my best ability through his strength. And
then Jesus comes with you everywhere you go.
It does.
Yep.
And so
you can see its effect. You can see his effect on people.
Yeah, it is.
I remember standing up. We were. The judge was about ready to read his sentencing, and he was wiping his tears from his eyes. I looked over at the defense table, and they're all kind of like, the handkerchiefs are out. You could just see Jesus was there, and really hard hearts were all melting right before my very eyes. Yep. And then as we walked out to the lobby afterwards, one of the detectives, and detectives can be a little hardcore. He goes, "Do you think it'd be okay if I sent you a Christmas card now and then?" And I thought, that's awesome, because that means he wants to be my friend. Yep. So it really does have an effect.
It does. I mean, for me, the greatest honor, not only see him, I think one of the police officers, I was driving in the neighborhood, I rolled through a stop sign, and I saw in my rearview mirror sirens coming on. I'm like, oh, I'm busted. Yeah. He pulled me over, and then I just gave him all my stuff, and he goes, "Pastor Kevin." I'm like, "What?" And it was Officer George. He goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "I know I ran through the sign." He goes, No. I goes, "I had to tell you, I've been watching you for the last 2 years, how you forgive this man." And I actually went to the church, a church for the first time in like 17 years. Wow. I gave my heart to the Lord this last week, and I wanted to know, do you have a Bible that I could have? Because I don't have a Bible. And he pulled me over for the Bible, and it allowed me to see how just, our world is longing to see genuine forgiveness and reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And if you can walk it out, and Christ has given us the model, and he's given us the power. It's not something you have to do in your own strength.
Can't do it on your own strength.
No.
It's really nice to meet you. I'm really glad you dropped by. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.